Hello and welcome to Hogging the Mic, the Boar's official podcast bringing you student journalism like you've never heard it before.
This week, we're bringing you an interview with a previous Boar editor who started her freelance journalism career while still a student at Warwick. She has gone on to write for a variety of music publications as well as national papers, including The Guardian.
But before we get on to top tips from this week's guest, let's spotlight some articles. Shall we start with the culture section?
So this week, I have chosen an article based around the recent comment made by Billie Eilish that wealthy figures need to donate more of their money to charitable causes. So this is an article by Zara Siddiqui entitled "Why Are You a Billionaire? The Necessity and Authenticity of Charity in Hollywood." And she highlights the question of who is donating money performatively and who is donating genuinely. So she mentions stars such as Taylor Swift and Leonardo DiCaprio, who have been accused of empty activism due to their carbon footprint, while also donating to different charities and speaking up about key issues in society. So it's like hypocritical in a way. And she emphasizes and expands on Eilish's point, stressing the importance of people with wealth and influence willingly donating money to help necessary causes. It's a really compelling piece, very well argued, and on a very interesting topic. So I highly recommend giving it a read.
So that does sound really interesting and different for the culture section too, which is always good to see. From the sports section this week, I'm highlighting a match report from a local fixture. It was written by Joaquim Romero and it's titled "Leamington versus Marine, Breaks hit rock bottom as winless slump continues." So this piece looks at a recent Leamington FC fixture in which they faced the Marines and unfortunately lost, but they lost and hit the bottom of the table, so it arguably wasn't a successful day. But from Joaquim's report, you can tell that the atmosphere at the stadium, which it always is, was brilliant. And as someone who has been to Breaks games a number of times, it's always great down there and it's always a lot of fun with really, really enthusiastic fans and a lot happening. So this piece not only offers a match report, but it also really describes that atmosphere and describes why students should really get down and watch these fixtures which are local to them. So if you are looking for local sport, it's definitely a good option to go down to Leamington FC. It's really cheap as well for students to get in. So, and if you need any more persuasion, then you can read this article and it will persuade you.
I'll have to give it a check out and see if I'm persuaded as well. But in the news section this week, the article that I'm highlighting may come as welcome news to some listeners and students. It's Sam Capper's "Heavy Drinking in Youth May Aid Career Success," study suggests. In this article, Sam takes a look at a new study from Norwegian sociologist Dr. Willy Pedersen that has claimed that those who begin drinking heavily at a young age will receive better education and higher income in later life. Sam takes us through this news and the findings in this really well-written and at times quite satirical article. But what's fantastic, which isn't always the case in news articles, is that Sam also considers the other side of the story, in that the study may not be all it originally seems, and the correlation may not be as strong as Dr. Pedersen would like to make out. So before you ditch your 5 p.m. lecture and head to the Duck or T-Bar to grab a pint, maybe check out Sam's article for the full story. It's a great read through from one of our new writers who's already contributed to 4 sections in just a few weeks, which is always great to see.
And on that note, as Tom said, it's great to see even more new names pop up in the bylines of both the print and the website. Also, our society has recently expanded even more as each section has welcomed their new deputy editors. So it's great to see so many new people.
And yeah, it's been great on campus seeing so many of the new faces in the offices for some layup training and interviews for their positions as well, and also at our socials, of which we have many more coming up. So please do continue to get involved. If you're listening on the day of release, we'll be at the Dirty Duck tonight for the pub quiz, so please do come along. And if you would like to hear your article being spotlighted here at Hogging the Mic, you can take a pitch on one of our WhatsApp chats or message one of the section editors with your ideas. We're always interested in hearing what you would love to write about.
So now let's move on to our interview with our Boar alum this week. Our guest has written for a variety of publications, from the music publications Kerrang and NME to receiving bylines in national newspapers such as The Guardian.
She shared all of her inside knowledge on what it's like to be a freelance music journalist and her top tips on how to start your freelance career while still at university.
So sit back, relax, and enjoy our chat with Emma Wilkes.
Our guest today started out at the Boar as a contributing writer before being elected as music editor. While editing at the Boar, she began to write freelance with various publications, including Guitar.com, You Discover Music, and DIY. Now, she has recently celebrated 5 years as a freelance music journalist and has had bylines in a range of music publications such as Kerrang, NME, and The Guardian. I can't tell you how many times I stumbled across one of her articles when I was researching pictures for the music section when I was music editor last year. So let's welcome today's guest, Emma Wilkes.
Hiya, how are you doing?
We're good, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on today and chatting to us. We really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So let's get started with our questions. And we're going to begin with the question that we always start all of our podcasts with, and that is, what drew you to the Boar?
The funny thing with me is that I kind of always knew that I had an interest in journalism. And I think I've been, like, throughout school, I was always writing something. Like, I started more of as a fiction writer, but then I was reading a lot of music magazines growing up, and I kind of just thought, you know what, this would be absolutely amazing if there's a way for me to combine, like, the two things I love in the world, most love in the world rather, like music and writing. There was actually a way for me to do it. And so I thought it was going to be like a natural way for me to be able to write for a living. But then I suppose, given that music journalism is such a, I guess it is quite a small field, I guess, that, like, everybody who does it knows most other people who do it. It's that niche a thing. I figured, you know what, I would actually be open to exploring lots of different kinds of journalism. So I can at least just be a journalist, even if, like, music journalism that didn't necessarily work out for me. So I kind of always thought that when I went to Warwick, I started in 2019, that I was going to try and write for the Boar. So I already kind of had that in my head going, and I don't know how many people necessarily feel that way. And I know lots of people tend to sort of join later on, or like kind of come in through different means, but like that was always what I was going to do. And I studied English and creative writing as well. So it was quite complementary and easier to sort of slot into my student life than like working on a longer project. Because I wanted to write a novel while I was in uni, and it did not happen because I didn't necessarily have the same amount of time. But it was easy to do with something like the Boar, when I could just pick up stuff when it suited me, and I could knock out an article in a few hours. I think a lot of the time when I was a student, and maybe especially as a fresher, I'd maybe do more things. Given that I was a student in the pandemic, which is also quite a big part of my journalism story, it always comes up every time people ask me how my career has gone. I started writing a lot more because it was just a really good way to sort of it's something really good to put my energy and time into, as kind of as a way of a distraction from everything that was going on, and from how depressing everything felt when I didn't know when I was going to be able to go back. But yeah, that is a slightly long-winded explanation of how it was that I ended up at the Boar.
And you touched upon it there, but you wrote a lot at the Boar for a lot of different sections, but you obviously ended up as being music editor at the Boar. What was it that specifically about the music section that appealed to you?
Well, I suppose, as I said before, it was very much being interested in music journalism from the beginning. And I always knew that I wanted to contribute a lot to the music section, sort of develop my sort of style of music writing. I'd done like a little bit of it beforehand in school and in sixth form, literally just for fun, album reviews, opinion pieces, stuff like that. So that I definitely knew I wanted to sort of expand on what it was that I was already doing. But then I gave everything. I didn't quite write for every section, but I think I did most of them, and I did actually end up also getting nominated for a Student Publication Association award. But it was actually for something I wrote in the TV section, not music section, which was quite interesting to me. But I did manage to I actually really sort of enjoyed like wearing a lot of different journalistic hats. even though I always kind of felt most drawn to doing music stuff.
For sure. And while you were music editor at the Boar, you didn't just write for the university paper. You also wrote freelance for plenty of different music publications, as Lucy mentioned earlier, including guitar.com, You Discover Music, and DIY, among others. Why did you decide to go freelance whilst still at university, and how did you go about securing those first bylines?
It was basically quite circumstantial because, as I mentioned earlier, I was at uni during the pandemic, and it was during the pandemic that I actually started freelancing, because I had so much time to kill, because I basically ended up doing it happened at the end of my first year. I did all my uni assignments really, really quick because I just needed something to do. And I was like, well, now what? I'm going to be here for, I think by the end of it, I was like, well, I'm going to be here till September. I was at home from March 2020 until September 2020. Effectively having my first year of uni cut short. So I thought, what can I do? What can I do with my time? And I started exploring through Twitter. I started exploring ways I could freelance. I saw people on Twitter talk about it. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me, because I thought that freelancing was something only experienced journalists did. I didn't realize you could start your career like that, and to actually discover that was possible. And that was actually a way of starting out and actually building up experience. That was amazing to me. I didn't have to wait for anybody to give me a job or give me the green light. I could actually kind of make it work for myself. So I sent a lot of bad pictures in the early days, but you're always going to when you first start freelancing. And then I discovered that half the battle is actually knowing who to pitch and what it is that they're looking for. And so when I got a hold of that through some contacts on Twitter and asking some other journalists for advice, I went and tried thinking of ideas to get stuff published professionally. And then it took a good few months of hearing nothing or getting rejections, some of which were sort of just like, oh, we'll pass. And sometimes they're a little bit more encouraging, which is quite nice. And then I actually managed to secure something around about, it was probably August 2020. I managed to land a commission with guitar.com after getting a contact from a friend and sent them in the pitch. I interviewed Hot Milk, who were actually quite new at the time. They hadn't put an album out or anything like that. I think they were actually still an independent band at the time, and they've gone on to do amazing things. They'd toured the Foo Fighters beforehand, but now they've put out 2 albums, and they're actually going on quite a big tour later in the year, which I was bound to just know about off the top of my head, because that's very much the field. That's very much the field I work in. That's very much something that I'm used to doing. And then obviously I wasn't always able to pitch loads because I had a degree to do, and more stuff was happening in my life as uni. I was able to go back to uni for my second year, obviously, although things were still a little bit different. Things weren't properly back to normal till the start of my third year. But I still pitched here and there. I landed a byline in the Telegraph midway through my second year. I could not believe my luck. I was like, I don't know how this has happened. I wrote a piece about Foo Fighters after their editor did a seminar. And there was actually a lot of seminars at this time as well that really, really helped me, because I suppose it was the pandemic. Everyone was looking to maybe upskill or find something to do. So I did a lot with Student Publication Association, some other journalists. I think Terry White did some seminars, and those are really, really useful. So I learned a lot in that time as well, to get me where I eventually got. And then things sort of started snowballing, and by my third year, I was doing a lot more freelancing. Kerrang had taken me on. By the beginning of my third year, I started writing for Alternative Press. I did a bit of time with You Discover Music, and I wasn't always necessarily able to pitch a lot, but then I was starting to get offered things, and so I wouldn't always have to pitch as much, because I just think, well, I've got a degree to do. I'm going to just do as much as I can there, and then just sort of take on what I can, rather than necessarily going out looking. So I had quite a unique third year in that sense. And obviously I was music editor for the Boar as well. So I was thinking of pitches and trying to get people interviews and stuff. And that was really exciting as well. And I learned a lot of skills too, like in design, like social media management, and that sort of stuff has been invaluable to me going forwards.
You mentioned there quite a lot about pitching, and then you also mentioned how, as a music editor, you had to pitch for the Boar. So, as you know, a big part of the Boar is pitching, but also a big part of freelance journalism is pitching. What kind of advice would you give to editors at the Boar now, or other maybe writers who are looking to get into freelance about pitching? What would you recommend? How do you recommend going about it?
Oh, that's a really good question. Firstly, always helps to read a lot, especially like news related things, because a lot of what you pitch will be related to what's going on in the news, especially if like there's an interesting angle you can think of to it, or you think of some different ways that you could look at a certain story, especially if there's like an angle or an opinion or a side of the story that you don't think is being heard enough. I think that's a really important thing, especially if it's personal as well. You know, having sort of being able to pitch something. I think if you actually go into freelance and actually you've got like a personal connection to something or some personal expertise, that's always could help above, say, I think that's a good reason to sort of suggest yourself for an idea, as opposed to, say, another freelancer doing it or them doing it in-house. I think that can be quite advantageous. But I think even just to engage with what it is that you see, whether that's on social media, not even necessarily like liking and commenting, just sort of engaging with something in your mind and sort of contemplating an idea, what it says about society now, what it says about culture now, why it's relevant to now. I think that will always sort of give you a little bit of a leg up as well. So I hope that is of some use.
Yeah, definitely is.
And also, really gave really great advice there about how to go about pitching and write those pitches. But where do people find the publications that they want to pitch to, and how do they find the contacts as well to specifically like send those pitches in?
That's a really good question, and I think that knowing where to go is half the battle. I think it can help a lot to ask other journalists for advice, or go, how did you pitch this thing? Who do you pitch to? What do they like to work with? Because I think at the end of the day, if you're freelance, you are working for yourself, but you're also part of a wider community. And it can be really good to like develop professional relationships with other journalists who actually know what it's like. And I mean, it's people sometimes email or message me asking for some advice, and I try and help people wherever I can. Sometimes that stuff slips through the net a little bit, because I might see it and I go, okay, I need to reply to that email, and then I completely missed it. And then I have to go back to it and be like, sorry, I know you were waiting, but do you mind if I talk to you now? So I kind of like to try and sort of pay that forward a little bit, because I know that getting some advice from other journalists myself, there's sometimes you can even find pitching spreadsheets about as well that have details of who to pitch, what it is they're looking for, and also importantly as well, if you're trying to make the step into getting paid for your work, they'll tell you how much they pay. And I think that could be a really important thing as well, especially if like the extra income is going to be like especially useful to you. Well, I suppose it's useful for everybody, but I suppose that's the thing. If I suppose, you know, cost of living crisis and stuff like that, and needing like an extra stream of income. What was I saying? Yeah, that's essentially the long and short of it. Sometimes you can look on a masthead as well. If you sort of go deep enough into a publication's website, and you can find the editor's details and their contact information. Sometimes that's easier to find on a website than others. But I think it's obviously getting your ear to the ground and asking people you might follow on Instagram. I don't really think Twitter's as useful a journalistic resource as it used to be, which is quite a shame, because I used to network a lot on there. But a lot of people have sort of seen the state of that site and moved away from it because they just don't really want to be associated with it. And the user base has gone down a lot. But yeah, I think interaction with other people who do your job, I think, is a really key thing. And then, you know, you can make friends through it as well. And I think that's a really, really cool thing. Like, I've met a lot of cool people through doing my job, including people I genuinely consider friends for life. So hopefully that's something that might be of benefit to anybody listening who might want to have a crack at being freelance, whether that's something you want to do after uni or while you're still in uni. And if you still want to, and if you want to do it in uni, absolutely do it. Go ahead. Absolutely give it a go, especially if student issues is something you're passionate about as well. That might give you like a little bit of an edge when you're pitching things going. I've experienced this personally as a student, and I don't think anybody will look down on me for that.
So whoever's put that they want to ask that question, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, we can cut this.
We can cut that bit out.
So you mentioned there about pitching and freelancing whilst still being a student as well. What do you think the best tips are for a student to balance their time between their uni work, maybe their Boar work, and if they want to freelance as well on the side?
Oh gosh. Well, so I think firstly, I think your degree does need to be sort of take priority. And like the thing is that it's kind of, if you'll have a lot of time in the summers as well to sort of work on it too. But obviously I think you've got to sort of put your degree first at the same time. And then if you've got sort of extra time in a weekend to pitch something that you can schedule, that can work really well. Or if you've got an absolutely idea that you're absolutely burning to write and it's a little bit more time sensitive, like you need to sort of write it now, then there's nothing wrong with cracking out a quick email and seeing what happens. But I definitely found my working hours got a little bit longer in third year as a result. I definitely remember making ramen to eat very late at night because I'd inevitably end up doing something at a silly hour of the night when I shouldn't be. But I suppose that is quite a sort of a big part of student life. I suppose it's easy. Yeah, I think that's generally the most important thing, is just sort of using, I suppose it kind of depends at the end of the day how much time and energy you've got, because obviously then there's a lot of demands on your time, whether that being from degree and that from socializing. But I suppose the other thing that I think is quite cool, especially when you've got like a little bit more time on your hands, like say when you've finished all your work for your degree at the end of the year, for example, and you've got a few months in which to kill time, that can actually be quite useful. And I think the thing that I like to think is that you can kind of make your own work experience in that way, because I think that was very much the case for me, because when I was pitching more, say in the summer of between my second and third year, when I was trying to do, I've lost my train of thought now, pardon me. When I was trying to do that, it was still the pandemic, and a lot of places were not running internships, or they weren't running very many. So I felt like I kind of had to do it by myself, and freelancing was kind of the way I ended up making some of that experience. But on that note, actually, freelancing for journalists, I'm pretty sure does have like a remote work experience scheme, which you get paired with a journalist who might assign you some tasks or might offer you some mentoring. And that was actually really beneficial for me as well. My mentor was Matt Parker, and he was really, really helpful in getting me to where I am. So shout out, Matt, if you're listening. But that's obviously a scheme I'm pretty sure is still running, and that's something I would very much recommend if you are a student and you need something to do with your summer. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, that's really good, because getting journalism work experience is something that is notoriously quite difficult, as I think the three of us kind of know. So yeah, that's really good advice. So you've touched upon how you managed to build up lots of contacts during your time at uni, which helped you to sort of grow your freelance career. But why was it specifically after university that you decided to keep on doing the freelance route rather than maybe go into doing like a master's in journalism or an NCTJ, for example?
So the funny thing is that I did contemplate doing a master's. And I kind of like the idea of sort of having a little bit more formal instruction from people who've been doing this for a lot longer than me. I wasn't so sure about an NCTJ because, I mean, maybe it might have been, I wasn't sure how relevant it was going to be for me as in music journalism, but I think it might have been. I think it might have been in hindsight, especially with the stuff that you end up doing, because obviously I think there's actually probably a little bit more crossover with music journalism or other types of culture journalism than there is with other journalistic fields, like news stories, for example. I've ended up doing a lot more news than I thought I was going to end up doing. And to be fair, there's skills that are quite helpful to have in your back pocket anyway. I ended up deciding against the masters, partly because I think cost was partly a reason, especially with the way that master's degrees are funded, which I personally think is actually quite unfair. And I've always kind of had that thought that you get one loan and that's it. And that's something that it's never really sat with me. But it was also partly because I'd built up quite a lot of freelancing as well, and I wanted I was eyeing up applying for masters at City Uni, which I know lots of Boar alumni have done and found very, very useful. But people did remark to me that it was quite intense. And so I was like, am I going to be able to freelance alongside this? And I think there were people who told me maybe not at first. And I thought that I didn't feel like it made sense for me to cut down freelancing in order to do a master's, given the amount that I'd managed to do already, that was already really, really happy with. So I thought I was actually only going to be freelance temporarily after leaving uni. I thought, okay, I'll do this full time until I get a 9-to-5 job, and maybe freelance on the side, because that is quite a common setup in music journalism. But then I decided against that because I'd been applying for jobs for a couple of months. I'd had a few interviews, I hadn't really gotten anywhere, but it was getting a bit disheartening, because I thought there's nothing here that I want to do as much as I want to do music journalism. The actual application process of filling out the same forms over and over and not necessarily hearing anything back was getting on my nerves as well. Not everybody can necessarily afford to, the joke I made was that I rage quit on the job hunt. Not everybody can necessarily afford to do that, or it doesn't necessarily work out for everybody. And like, I also had a lot of extra time to work on freelancing because I had a pandemic to work through. Not everybody could necessarily has that sort of unexpected sort of element of time there. So I ended up, in the end, I decided I was going to end up freelancing full time. I was already doing quite a lot, and I thought, you know what, this plus a 9-to-5, I will just end up working all the time and never have a moment to myself and probably burn out very fast. And I'm genuinely one of the best decisions I've ever made, because I just sort of scaled it up, asked around to see where I could get some more work, ended up doing some new shifts, which actually was quite good in terms of having sort of a stable income and having something regular, because you don't necessarily always know how much work you're going to get a month, but having like a bit of a foundation with something that you can count on with something like shifts can actually be really, really useful. So I'm really glad that things kind of turned out the way that they did. I think a master's would obviously, I'm not really in a position to say. I think with masters, I think as well, I know a lot of people who have really, really benefited them, and I'm sure people have benefited a lot from the NCTJ as well. So I definitely can't shirk either of those methods. I mean, I haven't tried them, but it's just depends on sort of how much you manage to do in terms of published pieces and how much you manage to build up beforehand. But they've been really, really useful for people, and my route into it was a little bit different, but I'm still really happy with the decisions I made. And I think it has very much worked out for me, which I'm really, really happy about, because I didn't ever think I would actually ever be able to do as much as I've been able to do. And I'm basically very, very grateful every day that I managed to do it.
And you speak there about like how positive freelance journalism has been for you. You also touched upon the downsides as well, but if you could boil it down maybe into a few points, what do you think for you are the main benefits of being a freelance journalist right now?
Well, that's a really good question. So firstly, I definitely think if you manage to sort of play your cards right and you sort of build up the right amount of work, you can definitely earn more as a freelancer than you might be able to in a junior staff role. I know that I'm most likely earning a lot more in the position that I'm in than if I was say in a junior staff job. You can't be made redundant either. I mean, you will probably lose some work along the way. That will inevitably happen. But I sort of say it's like being a freelance journalist is almost like being a starfish, in that if you had like an ordinary job and you lose your job, you've lost all your work. But if you're a freelance journalist, it's like you've had an arm cut off and you can grow it back like a starfish. So I think that's quite helpful. You can lean on your other sources of income if some work ends up falling through. I had that happen to me earlier this year, but then I ended up that sort of paved the way for me landing my role at Drowned in Sound, which I've been doing for the last few months, and I've been having an amazing time doing that. So very much was the case that the door closed and a window opened in that regard. I like the flexibility of being freelance as well, in the sense that I can kind of dictate my own working hours. And if you're not a morning person, I am definitely not a morning person. That can actually also be really, really helpful for you. I can work wherever I want. I write in cafes, I write in trains. I write a lot on the trains because I'm taking trains all over the place. I write at my kitchen table. I can sit and write in my pajamas if I want, which is a silly benefit, but it's quite a cool one. I very much like the fact that I definitely feel like every day is different in terms of what it is that I might be doing. Some days I'll be writing, some days I'll be researching, pitching, sifting through transcripts, which is a bit dull, but you know, or I'm going to events, or maybe I'm going on my what I call a journo field trip. Like if I'll be going to like London or somewhere to do an interview, or somewhere further afield. I also do a lot of live reviews and festival coverage, so that involves a fun little bit of travel as well. So I like that aspect. I like that aspect of it. You can take a day off when you want. Sometimes that doesn't always happen though, because the amount of hours you work is directly correlated to how much you end up earning. So there is that your work-life balance can kind of fall by the wayside a bit, and mine has definitely been skewed in the wrong direction. I'm trying to work on it. I'm doing my best, especially lately, because I had a major project that I finished that took up a lot of time, and I'm like, okay, I think I can try and sort of ease off a little bit now, because I've had such a heavy one for the last few months. You have to do your own tax return as well, but you get used to it. If you know what you're doing, it's actually not so bad. Most of it involves clicking through a form, and they ask you lots of long questions with lots of words. You go, no, I don't think this applies to me. Click, carry on. So it is an interesting thing, but I think it can really work. For some people, and I think a lot of journalists will end up being freelance at some point, whether it's by choice or out of circumstance, when say you get made redundant, then you end up freelancing for a while, either until the next job comes along or on a more permanent basis. So it's actually the skills involved with it. I suppose it's kind of similar to other areas of journalism, but I think you can develop skills while freelancing that are just generally useful to have.
And you spoke there a lot about how being a freelance journalist is so varied in sort of things that you do, and you also write a real variety of articles as well. You are often not the interviewee in an interview situation. A lot of your published work is made up of interviews, and you've written lots of great cover stories for the likes of Kerrang and NME. So we often get the opportunity to interview a variety of people through the Boar too. Lots of our writers, specifically for the music section, get to interview some really cool artists. So do you have any advice or top tips for somebody who's about to do their first interview?
Oh, that's a good question. So firstly, you obviously want to prepare as thoroughly as possible. Read other interviews that the artist has done recently. So you can firstly, you might get some more inspiration for things to ask about, but you can also gauge a sense of what they've been asked about a lot. And if you can offer them something a little bit different, something that's maybe a little bit unexpected, then I think they'll probably appreciate that a lot, because obviously they'll get asked a lot of the same questions. But if you offer them something that's a little bit more left field, they will absolutely appreciate that. And you know, it's always a great boost when they go, oh, that's a good question, and then they have to sort of can't really sort of just answer like they're reading off the script, and they just have to pause and go, oh, I've got to think about that for a second. That's how you know you've done something really cool. You can get, that's the thing, like listen to the album, read the press release, read the bios, see what questions it sparks, see what's cute, what makes you curious about it. What do you want to know yourself? What is it that you're thinking about? You're like, oh, I'd love to know the answer to that. There'll be obviously some very sort of basic questions that you might want to stay away from. Don't ask somebody how they've got their band name. They've had that before. It's boring. Influences sometimes are that can feel a little bit contrived as well. So if you can think outside the box a little bit, they'll sort of always appreciate that too. And the other thing that I can always recommend, oh, I'm going to sneeze. Pardon me, sorry. The other thing that I can always recommend as well is making it conversational. Like, well, it doesn't have to necessarily be question answer. If they say something that you think is interesting, but you don't necessarily have a question to that, feel free to just sort of respond back to them, especially if you want them to say a little bit more on what they've already just said, rather than sort of respond to it like you would if you were like in the pub talking to them, rather than necessarily being you're sat there on Zoom trying to ask questions and stuff like that. And then if you get a bit of a back and forth and a bit of a rapport going, I think that'll be really good. And you can definitely sort of feel a difference in how they respond to you. And it kind of you know it's going well, and you can kind of forget that it's an interview, and it feels like it's just two people having a conversation. Well, obviously you will be asking them questions, but actually when you get a little bit of a dialogue going, that will always serve you really, really well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can suggest. Don't be afraid. I know the big other one is don't be afraid to, obviously you probably will have questions written down. I know that some people have bullet points. Or some people, I know a couple of people who do not have any written questions at all, but I'm not on the level that they are, definitely not. Be prepared to not stick to the script. Obviously you'll have your questions written down in a certain order. You do not have to stick to them. In fact, it's probably better that you don't, because you will want to jump in with, if an artist says something that relates to another question that you've got later on, just ask that question straight away. Mix the order up if necessary. Just go with the natural flow of the conversation, and do not be afraid to ask questions you haven't prepared. Like if they say something that is of interest in you that you want to know more about, but it's not written down in your list of questions, doesn't matter. Ask it anyway. Make stuff up on the fly if it interests you, you know. Follow what they say rather than sticking to a script. Kind of let the conversation take on a life of its own. That's absolutely something I would recommend.
And I think they're fantastic tips, and I think a lot of writers from the Boar will take a lot of them on board as well. But just as you give all those tips, I'm about to completely listen to absolutely none of them and go for the next one that we've got on the script. That is, obviously Lucy mentioned that you've done loads of interviews. On that note, who is your favorite person or group or anything or anyone that you've interviewed through your career?
Oh, there's quite a few. There's quite a few that I can think of. Courtney LaPlante from Spirit Box. I've interviewed her multiple times. She is absolutely amazing. She's such a lovely personality, but also she will always have lots to say. Corey Taylor was one of my favorites as well. I mean, I always knew, like, top of my bucket list interview wise, Hayley Williams, Corey Taylor, and one of those I've actually managed to do, and that was Corey Taylor 2 years ago. He was such an interesting guy. He had some really interesting and really nuanced things to say. Will Gould from Creeper is amazing to talk to as well. Really, really sweet guy. Really lovely, warm personality, and he just loves music so much, and you can definitely sort of see that come through in the sort of art that he makes as well. Trying to think if there's anybody else who stands out. Ryan Reynolds from Shikari is amazing to talk to. Like he's got so much to say, and like you sort of really want to listen. Gosh, are there any others I can think of? I think those are kind of the main ones that are sticking out for me. But I also actually interviewed a slightly more recent one. I spoke to Matt from Dinosaur Pilot for The Guardian a few months ago, and he was a really nice guy, but he has some really interesting things to say about sort of more difficult experiences that he's had and what he's learned from them. So yeah, that's the more recent one that sticks out to me too.
And have you ever been completely starstruck by someone you've interviewed, and how do you kind of get over that feeling and work up the courage to still conduct a really strong interview with them?
Corey Taylor was absolutely one for me, but the slightly more helpful thing is that I was introduced to him beforehand, because he ended up doing an event with Kerrang. I interviewed him from a different publication, but his publicist was like, "Do you want to come along to this event so you can say hi?" Because she knew I was trying to pitch something. So I was like, "Oh, yes, please." So I ended up rushing to London on a Sunday afternoon to go and meet him, and that was absolutely amazing. But that meant I kind of got some of the nerves out of the way beforehand. But I do remember still being very nervous before interviewing him, because obviously, as I said, that was genuinely one of the absolute dreams for me. I think at the end of the day, I think the thing that will help you, I think it's maybe easier for me to sort of say this because I've done a lot of interviews and I'm quite used to this. But when you sort of feel like, when you kind of just lock in and get into the zone, that I think that will obviously be really helpful. But even before I move about a bit, I think that's actually a really good thing to cope with nerves in general. Just move your body about, like shake, like even if you're just doing that, and just because like that's what geese do. I think they get into a fight and then they'll start shaking their wings about just to get all the tension out of your body, move around, jump about if you're full of nervous energy. But you can also very much use that nervous energy to your advantage as well, if you can actually sort of channel it into thinking sharply and using that adrenaline for good. But obviously, I think once you kind of get into it and you ease into the conversation, the nerves will also naturally ebb away a little bit as well.
And we mentioned at the very beginning, but recently you celebrated 5 years of being a music journalist, and you released an article on your Substack which included many things which you have observed since becoming a journalist, including the importance of having political awareness in cultural journalism and the difficulty of taking a selfie while holding a magazine. So what would you say is the biggest lesson that you have learned in your 5 years of being a music journalist?
Ooh, you know what? There's quite a few things, but I think actually one of the most powerful things for me is actually seeing close up that music can actually really change lives and bring people together. And I think when you talk to people who are really passionate about what they do and you actually see how much of a force for good music is, how undervalued it is by sort of the wider political system, especially when you've had years of a political party who's kind of frowned on the arts a bit. You know, remember Rishi Sunak saying creatives should retrain during the pandemic, and everybody just getting a bit annoyed by that. I don't think it's actually a frivolity to say that music is actually capable of changing the world, or at very least it can change individuals who then go on to make bigger change themselves. So, and you see it as well. I've seen that a lot with doing grassroots venues reporting, writing a lot about what it is they go through and how much they change the lives of communities, the communities around them. So, you know, if you end up sort of writing about music journalism, it's not, obviously there is a sort of side aspect of, is this my job? I'm having so much fun talking to big people in music and hearing albums early and stuff like that. Like, the importance of what you're doing, you don't underestimate the importance of what you're doing, because you are actually doing something valuable, asking questions of wider cultural moments and asking what it means and what's being done to sort of keep music alive. And I think it's a lot of, you kind of see what a good thing it is when you actually I went to Glastonbury for the first time earlier this year, and it was such a positive space. It was positive, but it was political, but it was so joyful at the same time. And those two things can absolutely coexist. And I know that it definitely gives me, music in general does give me a lot of hope and a lot of faith and a sort of a sense of well-being that I might not have necessarily had if I wasn't as immersed in it as I was. So I think cultural journalism is absolutely, its importance is definitely underestimated at the end of the day. And, you know, you will inevitably you will do things that maybe is still really powerful, even if you're not necessarily doing something like doing hard-hitting investigations or something like that. There's still actually a real sort of vitality in actually having journalism that asks questions, speaks truth to power, tries to get people's perspectives. So, and I don't think that's a naive thing to believe at all, that music can change the world after all, actually.
No, definitely. We're going to move on now to something which we also ask everyone we interview, which is a series of quick-fire questions. So we're going to just blast through them. So firstly, you might not like either of these, but tea or coffee?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm slightly more of a coffee person, to be fair. I drink a lot of both, but I think coffee, I've been a coffee drinker for longer than a tea drinker, and I do like a cappuccino, to be fair.
A weekend at a festival or a night at a concert?
Oh, it's going to have to be the festival, I think, because you get more music. You get more music in the space of a weekend than just by seeing a few bands. And I suppose I guess it's a longer experience, I guess, as well.
Dream interview guest?
Hayley Williams, easily.
One thing that you always carry with you as a journalist?
Oh, as a journalist, I mean, it depends what I've got. Depends what I've got on me. To be fair, it's probably, I mean, we all have our phones on us, but I mean, the notes app of my phone is actually sort of quite a big thing that I ended up using to write ideas down. But I usually do have a pen on me as well for some reason, especially if I've got a notebook full of questions that I'm adding stuff to. So yeah, not that thrilling, not that exceptional, but you know, it's something.
What's your favorite thing to do to unwind after a long day of freelancing?
Ooh, usually I am reading a book. So I'm literally just doing words at all times essentially. Or I am swaddled on a blanket on the sofa in front of the telly. Or maybe I'm cooking actually as well, because I love cooking.
As you mentioned, we're going to ask the same question now. What is your current read? You mentioned you like to unwind by reading. What are you reading at the moment?
I'm in the middle of Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which my sister lent to me because she really enjoyed it. I've not read proper science fiction for quite a long time, and it is quite sciencey, but it's actually making science pretty fun and I'm enjoying it. So it's something a little bit different.
Always nice to try something a little bit different as well. Again, another question that we always close our episode on, so one we always ask, and that is, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to anyone writing for the Boar at the moment?
Oh, that's a really good one. How would I go about this one? You know what? I mean, I suppose telling somebody to read a lot to improve their writing is quite an obvious one, but you know, I will always sort of stand back. But then within it, go on a search and find your favorite writers, find some writing role models. It was always Caitlin Moran for me. You know, somebody that you can sort of look up to and pick up sort of tips from in a way. Sometimes I find myself, even now, I still find myself, especially reading music books, mentally kind of making notes in the back of my head to myself, being like, oh, they've used this cool turn of phrase, or they're describing things in this way. I like this. I am also actually quite weird and nerdy and write down words or phrases that I see people use in things I'm reading. I'm like, oh, I like that phrase. I'm going to borrow that. I'm going to write that down so I remember it. So that is a tip, but that is a tip I will happily pass on to anybody. Be a nerd, write words down, write phrases down, and use those to sort of spice up your own writing.
And I think that's a perfect piece of advice to end the podcast. Emma Wilkes, thank you so much for joining us today. We've had an absolutely pleasure of a time to speak to you. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Yeah,
and once again, thank you for having me. Like, it's not been that long since I only graduated about 3 years ago. So everything just feels quite fresh still. It doesn't feel like that long ago since I was like in the Boar office trying to do stuff on InDesign. So this has been a fun little trip back to that period of my life, and the Boar genuinely has helped make me the journalist I am now and the person I am now. So you know, I will always back it.
We hope you enjoyed our chat with Emma Wilkes. It was great to hear from a journalist who has such a range of experience within the music journalism world.
Stay tuned for our next episode, when we will be talking to a social media creative at the concert ticketing platform Dice.
In the meantime, you can stay up to date with us by following us on Instagram at Hogging the Mic and on the main Boar Instagram at Warwick Boar. Don't forget to read our spotlighted articles and many more over on our website, www.theboar.org.
We'll be back on the 4th of December, but for now, enjoy the festivities that are starting around campus, and don't forget to treat yourself to a hot chocolate from Curiosity.